You're listening to Brainbusta Radio.
Hey, yo, Josh, let me get a little bit of reverb. Yeah. J. Will. Yeah, I'm about that lifestyle. I talk green work, repping it all over. It's right on the t-shirt. Fan for a lifetime. Yeah, that's a long pass. Figure I would show some love right on the podcast. Turn this up loud and make sure you don't do nothing else. Cause if you're listening to us, then you're improving your health. My name is J. Will. Welcome to the show, yeah. Wrestle, flow, yeah.
What is going on, everybody? This is Wrestling Reverb. I am Josh, and this week is a little bit different, guys, everybody. Kevin is unable to attend the Wrestling Reverb this week, but never fear, I'm not on my own. Trust me, I tried to record on my own, and it really wasn't working too much, so I was like, I need a friend. And I did talk to this guy like a couple of days ago, so I was like, hey, let's just shoot the shit for another hour. I do have Mr. JPQ here. JPQ, it's your first time, well, it's not your first time on Wrestling Reverb, but you've been on, I think, once before, maybe twice.
Yeah, I think we did a WrestleMania review on Wrestling Reverb.
And I think that's it. Other than that, you
haven't
been on. Yeah, you haven't been on. So, hey, it kind of, everything, I'm a believer in everything happens for a reason, so at least we get to chat for an hour or so.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. We're going to run this baby back from Wednesday for sure.
Yeah.
Because it's worth running back. So I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you bringing me on, man. And let's get into it, bro.
Yeah, so first and foremost, a little bit of housekeeping. Now, everyone is very aware of the bet that me and Kevin had going on. And I was, looking forward to rubbing it all in his face this week, but he's not here. So I'm going to be a nice guy. All right, so as everyone's aware, JPQ, I'm sure you're aware that there was a bet going on between me and Kevin.
I am aware.
So there was a little bit of a controversial finish, if you will, to the Iconics and Kabuki Warriors match this week. And the Kabuki Warriors won, but the Iconics retained their championship. So here's what we're going to do. Kevin, I know you'll be listening to this. And JPQ, you can be my little, I guess my other set of ears so I can't, go back on what I'm saying. So here's what we're going to do. Presumably, the Kabuki Warriors will get another shot at the Women's Tag Team Championship. I'm guessing it will be SummerSlam. So that bet that we have going on will take place in their next match. We'll up the odds. We'll do something. Stay tuned on my Twitter for all that information. But I guess I'm feeling in a very generous mood since Kevin isn't here this week. That's where we're going with that. So don't worry, everyone. I certainly have not forgot about the bet. But Kevin's going to lose. So, I'll just attest to that. So, Kevin, listening away right now. You're not out of the woods yet. But I am being nice. So I thought I'd be nice and show my nice guy self for JPQ as well.
I don't know if you have to, man, because I think I'm with Kevin on this. I don't know if the Iconics are going to make it another defense with the titles.
Whoa. I invite you here on my show and you just spit in my face like that? How dare you?
It's that PA love, brother. I mean, again, when me and Kevin are 90 minutes away from each other.
I suppose. But that's where we're going with the bet. That's where we're going with this. Everyone kind of knows where we're at on that. So, housekeeping out of the way. Now, for anyone that hasn't listened to No Particular Angle this week, I would suggest probably pausing this and going and listening to mine and JPQ's chat from the other day on his show, because we're just going to kind of spiral off in that direction anyway. But it was a fun chat. I do appreciate you having me on for that new series. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, it should be an interesting one. Just look for those pop-ups anywhere, whether it be on podcasts or BBR TV, different guests. I'm sure this won't be the first. You'll be the first, but you're not going to be the last time that you're on one of these pop-ups through the summertime. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, no joke. It was a lot of fun. And again, I think podcasting, and we've been podcasting for a while, is that although I love a good plan and I love a good attack method and going, yeah, this is what we're going to talk about, sometimes I do just like having a conversation with people, because at the end of the day, we're all just wrestling fans and we just like to talk about wrestling with other wrestling fans.
That's what it's about, man. You know, we just get in here and we find a topic and we just kind of play off each other and we see where it goes, because that's half the fun of wrestling.
Yeah, no joke. There's so much wrestling and there's so many different flavors, and we kind of talked about that on your show the other day about, you know, the different kinds of wrestling and stuff like that. But I do know one thing that we can kind of stick with at least today. I know you're the best person to talk about women's wrestling with, just in general. You love women's wrestling no matter what kind of era, am I right? You just kind of like women's wrestling, just the whole landscape of it.
All of it. So anywhere you want to take this conversation, I'm all about it.
And, you know, this is kind of, now that this is so weird. Like I said, I didn't really have a plan. But now that we're kind of talking about this, I'm like, oh man, I could talk about this and this and this. And again, you are the best person to talk about this. And I guess we'll kind of start with something that gets a lot of, and it has a lot of negative surrounding it. I want to talk about the kind of, sticking with WWE, because as you know, this show is mainly a WWE-based wrestling podcast, but the Diva Era. When I say that word to you, without, you know, going too in depth, what kind of first comes to your mind when I say the Diva Era?
Well, I think the way you say it is actually probably more positive than the way most people do, right? Because there's usually a negative connotation put on the Diva Era, right? It's almost condescending when someone's like, oh, the Diva Era, you know? And that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that it's this black spot, right, on the history and the lineage of women's wrestling. Where we are now, people frown upon or look down upon the Divas Era as a whole. I think most people are a little misguided in that, you know, and their thinking. But, you know, we can explore the Divas Era. But first thing that comes to mind for me, Josh, is the public perception of what the Diva Era was and how that has a negative spin put on it.
Yeah, I think you're completely and 100% right. I don't necessarily see it as a bad time. There was a lot of gems within. I know I'm not one to really negative put out a spin on any performer, because they've done a lot more than I've ever done in a wrestling ring. But I think a lot of people like to attack the actual performers and the actual divas of that era, whoever it may be. But there was a lot of good stuff within that. Like, there was a lot of gems within those years. I understand the focus really wasn't on wrestling anyway, so what they were getting paid to do was to look nice and to just be eye candy, and you can't really say that they didn't do that. They did that well. So within the parameters and within the limits and the boundaries that they were given, they did their best. They did the best job that they were, you know, asked to do. They weren't asked to go out there and put on 5-star classics, although a lot of them, you know, you look at some of the wrestlers of that era, like the quote-unquote wrestlers, like Beth, like Natty, etc., they could go out there and put on fantastic matches, but it wasn't about that. So you can't really say this person is terrible at wrestling, this person is terrible at wrestling. They did what they were told to do.
Yeah, it's both. There's some positive elements and there's some negative elements. And really, when I speak negative elements, it's more of how we have forgotten some of the better wrestling talent that has come through that era. And whether that be Beth Phoenix, like you just mentioned, Lisa Marie, and the work that she put in as Victoria. Karma did a quick spot during that time frame. We had Eve Torres do a decent run with the Divas Championship, but we don't tend to remember them so much. It's really more of the Michelle McCools, the Laylas, the Mickey James in the fat suit, right, the piggy suit, and all that type of stuff is where we tend to gravitate towards when we talk about the sports entertainment side of the women's division back during the Divas Era.
Yeah, there was a lot of... who are some of your favorite kind of competitors within the Divas Era?
Well, I think it starts with Victoria. You know, I think the work rate that she was able to put together in her stretch and her runs with WWE are unparalleled. And you can put it up with some of the greatest performances, work rates, whether you want to go back to Trish Stratus, if you were a fan of hers, if you want to go back to Medusa, and then you want to move forward into what the current product is. You know, you go back and you watch some of the Lisa Marie matches, especially when she was working with quote unquote other wrestlers, right? And the work rates on both sides were there. and she wasn't carrying a match. And you could tell, like, she was serious about what she was doing. So whether she was wrestling Melina and the matches that they were able to put on in that era, like, that was some quality stuff in a time when we weren't expected to see quality matches. And I think that every once in a while she kind of gets a bad rap. So I'd like to start with her. I mentioned Melina. To me, outside of some, personnel issues that she may have had, and some controversies, that ultimately led to her leaving, justified, mind you. She was also someone that when she was in the ring, you could tell that she was a gamer. Like, she was ready to go. She took it seriously when she was in there, and strong performances. Obviously, early Natalya was amazing. She's still good now. I'm glad that she's getting a shot at the title again. I hope they build her back up into what she once was, because when she came in, she was really good. And people tend to forget that because she's been around for as long as she has, but she's really, really good. And then you had Beth Phoenix. Right? And then Beth Phoenix was the Glamazon, and whether she was in the Royal Rumble or she was doing some of the comedy spots, or she was, when she first came in, the Glamazon, and she was just that powerhouse, no nonsense type of power lifter character. Like, again, you had characters back then worth gaining your interest, and they should be celebrated.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of those people, to be honest. They were all... When you actually think back, like, again, there's so much negative just public perception of that era, but when you actually go back and actually look at the rosters from maybe like 2002 to like 2014, 15, there was a lot of good talent that come through there, and a lot of forgotten people, like forgotten workers, forgotten matches, forgotten moments. There was a lot of quality within that, and again, like you said, in a time when our expectations were not really made for that kind of stuff. I always was a fan of that the ladies. I just always was. And growing up, I was always like, as a kid, you don't really think about it, but as you get into your teenage years and older and older, you go, man, I can see that these girls can go. They're just not given the opportunities like the men are. And, it's a very different time now, and we're coming off of, a WrestleMania main event, and in 2000 and whatever, we would not have think we could really ever get there. In WWE's land, at least, we could not think, women could main event WrestleMania. It's not that they can't do it, it's just the possibility of them doing it was not very likely at all. It was almost, it was almost impossible. But you kind of mentioned Natty and Melina. Melina is a fantastic one. I have a lot that I think of in that time. You kind of mentioned Lay Cool. I thought Lay Cool were fantastic. Michelle McCool, I think, can still go now. You've seen her at the Royal Rumble last year and Evolution, and it seems she showed glimpses of, hey, you can really still do this. Caitlyn, I always think of Caitlyn. I think Caitlyn is one that people don't really recognize, as she come from literally no experience in the third season of NXT to really becoming a fairly decent worker. I think her stuff with AJ's one that they don't recognize as a pillar of this kind of, what kind of come into the women's evolution, whatever you want to call it. But AJ Lee is one that always kind of comes up. Can you think of any underrated kind of, or just kind of your personal take on some matches through that era that you thought, hey, this is actually pretty damn good for a time that's very limited with in-ring work?
Well, I think that so you had Trish and Lita early 05, yep. Right? And we kind of had this mass exodus of the Attitude Era talent, and those two kind of carried the division for a while. And then we kind of got Mickie James mixed back in, and I really enjoyed Trish and Mickie at the beginning of their route. It's hard because it's a lot like it's the opposite of a bad breakup, right? Like you always remember the good, you always forget the bad, right? When you reminisce on a bad relationship. And in this instance, I'm kind of doing the other. Like I kind of remember the bad.
Yeah.
And I remember like the Candice Michelle title run, right? And it's hard for me to sit and say like, okay, like I remember it being X, but I do remember Beth Phoenix on SmackDown. She had a banger with who was it? It was oh man, how am I blanking on this? It was Beth Phoenix, and I know she did it with Melina, but that's not who I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of somebody else. Gail Kim.
Oh yes, Gail.
Yeah, So it was Melina versus Gail Kim, and that was like, and I didn't know Gail at the time, right? And I was just like, wow, like look at these two going after each other, and the work rate that they were putting in. And it was a short match. Again, we didn't get many long matches back then, but they got like 7 minutes. They got like a full segment out of it, and they were going back and forth, and the crowd seemed to be into it, and my ears perked and my eyes widened when I watched this match because I'm like, okay, well this seems to be something worth paying attention to as a fan, just from the goggles of like wrestling product, right?
Yeah.
And I wish Gail would have stuck around a little bit longer. I know the reasons why she left, and again, totally justified. But it was one of those things where you really had a talent there in Gail, and you let her get away.
Yep.
And you know, she was somebody that she was capable of working with all the quote unquote divas, right? All the models they brought in and taught how to wrestle. She was part of that training team in a sense on TV because it was kind of trial by fire, right? Back then, they just kind of threw them out there and let them go. And you know, and so she sticks out as a bright spot for me through that time back in, I don't know, 06. Right, like 13 years ago, and she just retired. Like, so she's incredible. That's a good one that sticks out for me, as well as pretty much anybody that, again, Lisa Marie worked with. I was just a fan, and I engaged in those matches, and she did a very good job of putting over the talent on the other side. And I remember there was a Candice Michelle Victoria match, and I want to say it wasn't a pay-per-view. I want to say it was it could have been I think it was a SmackDown, another SmackDown. And it was just one of those ones where Candice Michelle came out and she just started settling in her punches a little bit better, and her kicks were on point that night. She was getting good selling work from Victoria, and it was, again, nothing more than a 5 or 7 minute match. But it was one where coming out of that, I was like more invested in Candice Michelle than I was moving in from a wrestling standpoint. And so like you saw the growth of these women over the course of this era. And those are the two that really kind of stick out to me.
Yeah, you talk like I've heard many times now. Hey, I have been. You've probably seen this on my Twitter and just the amount of times that we've talked. But I have been absolutely grilled on Twitter for being a Bella fan. I am a Bella fan through and through. I think from where they started to where they ended, I think they're two very both of them just improved. They're just so much. They're two different performers in the sense of where they started and where they ended their careers. But Brie Bella and Nikki have both talked about Victoria in the past and how gracious and how giving she was and how willing she was to help people that did not have the experience in the ring. And Brie Bella's first match was against Victoria, and she said Victoria made her look like $1,000. So it's kind of, it's the testament to Victoria and her just willingness. I think that's some of the best performers are the ones that chuck their ego out of the door. Because, I mean, Victoria at that point when Brie Bella started it was like 2008, 2009. She'd been in the business a while. She had multiple title runs, and it's just kind of like, it doesn't matter. I have to help this person now. That's my job to do. And, I mean, that's just a testament to her. When I mentioned the Bellas, what kind of runs through your mind?
I think they had a better second run than they did the first run.
Oh, yeah.
When they were brought in and they were kind of doing their thing and, very early in their careers, to me, I enjoy the theater element, right? So when they were doing the twin magic, the switch, right, during the matches, and they were utilizing the fact that they did look similar, and they did back then, right? They kind of grown into their own as they matured as individuals. But back then, really, I mean, it was 1 and 1A, right? Like they weren't terribly too far off each other, and this is pre Nikki kind of setting herself up, and Brie was really the star, right? If you remember back then, she was really the one that was getting the title shots, and she was the one that was having the better in-ring work, and she seemed to be the one taking it more seriously as they kind of seasoned Nikki along the way. And I thought it was a great run. Disappointed when they left because I thought they brought good elements to it. Didn't love the way they brought him back with Damien and
that was odd.
And the Rhodes. Yeah, I thought that was a little tough. But I was surprised when they were released. I didn't mind them. Didn't love them either, right? Like it was middle of the road for me, with them. Like when they were on TV, I paid attention. but it wasn't something where I was giggy and gaga for them.
Yeah.
As I was later in their run, right? Like their second run and how they were able to build that and really Nikki kind of set herself and set a good tone for herself that second run. I'm really happy that we got that because I think that they were untapped resources. They weren't utilized 100% of the way during the Divas era. And we got to really see what they could bring to the table after.
Yeah, I agree. I think their second run was heads and shoulders better than their first run, but they did actually, both did. I know that Brie has a bit of a negative surrounding her with her, last little comeback that she had. I'll steer clear of that. But Nikki, I mean, even post-neck surgery, that run that she had, from like SummerSlam of 2016 to Mania of 2017, she had like a nice run and she had some really great matches with Natty and she got some really great matches with Carmella. It was just a nice little run. So I do think when people say they don't add any value, they obviously do bring in eyes to the product. I will argue that with pretty much anyone. They do have somewhat of an outside appeal. I'm not saying they're like A-list celebrities. They're not. But they do bring in another audience just from the reality show and stuff like that. Do you think that Total Divas and Total Bellas helped usher in the women's evolution more so than wrestling fans will allow themselves to think it did?
I hope not. Right? Like, I mean, that's the goal. I mean, you never want to take away from people's accomplishments in the rings and what they were able to provide. And I think, again, like, look at the eras and look at the transitions, right? And my biggest knock on the Divas era as a whole was the fact that they, like, I say this a lot, but in this world, you can't be a little pregnant, right? Either you are or you're not, right? Yeah. And so coming out of the Attitude Era and going into the Ruthless Aggression Divas Era, the beginning, whatever that time period was, right? Like the 02, 04, 05 reign. They wanted to kind of keep that, sexual motif going with the male audience. Yeah. And then, but they wanted to transition into more of this, more to a wrestling product. And it literally took them an era to kind of figure out how it all works. Because the end of the Divas Era wasn't horrible. Right? Yeah. It was kind of just bad there in the middle of 2000s. And by bad, I mean like bad compared to today's standards, right? Yeah. So when Nikki got the title towards the end of that era and then this whole Divas Revolution was starting, well, what we saw was a commitment from the business, right? And they did as much as even putting themselves over by coming out and saying, give Divas a chance, right? And pushing this revolution forward that they committed to it coming out of the Divas Era. And so when you do that, and then you can get a standard bearer like Nikki, who was, the preeminent favorite coming out of that era at that time towards the back end, and you let her establish herself as the next in line to run through the roster, right? The Hulk Hogan of the Divas, the end of the Divas Era. Well, okay. And you bring up the talent underneath, you get them some seasoning, and then you let that take off because they're the ones that are going to take the torch moving forward. So I think they actually did that pretty well. I thought that transition was good, and I'm happy that it was Nikki, right? And through that reign because she transitioned, she helped to transition that, and that gets lost in translation from time to time. How important it was to take somebody who was labeled as a diva, who couldn't wrestle, who couldn't sell merch and make money, and have her be the one to transition the era that we once lived in into a more wrestling oriented division. Yeah,
I agree with you completely. You're talking about the ushering of kind of the divas to the more wrestling orientated, like women superstars, whatever you want to call them, of today. I think it would be kind of, I think it would be a little bit of a disservice to this chat if we didn't at least mention and kind of talk about AJ Lee. The only reason I bring her up is because really, for the first time in a while at that time, there was a woman who was in main event storylines, whether it just be character, based stuff with CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, John Cena, Dolph Ziggler, the list goes on. She was really the first woman to get organically really over, like, properly, and it had been a minute since that. And when she kind of worked with Caitlyn and their kind of history, they had a very underrated match of that era, I in my mind anyway, at Payback 2013. They had a brilliant match and a nice little feud, and then, AJ was at one point the longest reigning Divas champion until Nikki broke that record. But, she was kind of the star, and then it kind of ushered into Nikki and the Bellas, and then, so forth and so on, and Paige and stuff like that. Were you a fan of AJ Lee's?
Yes, very much so. And I don't want to diminish her impact on this revolution, because, to be honest with you, if she never came, in my opinion, if she never came along and the crowd didn't gravitate to her the way that they did, there would be no reason for WWE to make the change, right? The wholesale change to that division to go more wrestling oriented. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the wrestlers individually. I'm talking about the landscape of that division as a whole, yes. Right? So, if she wasn't as good as she was in the ring, if she didn't take it as seriously, if she didn't do the pipelines on the divas the way she did, if she didn't have the charisma and the talent and the acting chops to be able to go out there and perform with the male wrestlers at the rate that she did and the consistency that she did, well, there's really no reason why Vince or any of the players in the back, aka Vince, would find it necessary or have confidence in these women to then take the torch and move forward, right? So a lot like Nikki was the one that, once we got into the Revolution, was the one that, helped to transition it, because it was a new era and she was from the old era and she was holding on to the title. So that was that little narrative there. At the same time, without the spark of the gun, which was AJ Lee, it may never have come to fruition to begin with.
I agree. I agree with you completely in the sense of AJ, and once she won, after she worked with Punk and all of that, and she was kind of in a spot where she could elevate other talent. Like, she worked with Caitlyn, and she kind of worked with, she worked with Brie, and a lot of the, when she was going on against all the cast members of Total Divas, and where that kind of went, AJ was able to help other people while maintaining herself as kind of the star that wasn't on the reality show at that point. Because, a lot of the booking and a lot of the kind of everything was kind of centered around Total Divas at that point, because they were really pushing that show hard, and it gained a lot more of an audience. So that was kind of the kind of take it had on the division, but AJ was kind of the one against it in a sense. And then when AJ started working with Paige and stuff like that, I think at that point, for me, it's because NXT was a fairly new thing, and Paige and Emma and what they were doing down in NXT. I think, at least for me, that was the kind of time I was going, this is the time when they can make something of this. They have the stars in AJ and in Paige, the Bellas, and that's where we're kind of centered around at the very beginning of the Divas Revolution, and then you had Sasha and Co come up. But that was like the four they were really focusing on, and out of those four, you could get some quality stuff out of those four, and there was enough rotation for a little while to make it go, hey, we need something to change. And then, of course, the fans got involved with Give Divas a Chance. I know there's a lot of things that kind of went into Give Divas a Chance and then the Divas Revolution, but and a lot of it is going to be just a combination of many things, but what do you think is the main catalyst that kind of set this off? Was it the girls down in NXT? Was it just a cultural thing of WWE needed to be with the rest of the world in sports and in entertainment, how women were kind of coming together and going, hey, we're stars just like our male counterparts?
I think it was a two-step process. I think it started when WWE took it seriously, in my opinion, is the success of Total Divas. Once they saw that there was money and investment from mainstream casual fans and non-fans to follow and be interested in these women wrestlers, then they saw the cash cow and they were like, okay, like this is where we want to go with this, which is why we saw a lot of investment on TV of these same people that we saw on the E Entertainment Network or wherever you get it, right? In the stateside, it was E.
Oh, it's here,
so,
E too.
Yeah, so I think that was the first spot, right? From there, then you had Emma versus Paige in NXT TakeOver, the first one, as well as what AJ was doing on the main roster with her work rate performances, her and Caitlyn in the battle that they were having, and then the promo work and the character work driven from AJ, and you incorporate those two things together and to show the confidences within the wrestling industry that the girls, the women can hold their own. And so those two things together, in my opinion, are the catalyst that then drove the commitment side from management.
Yeah, and hey, I'm glad you brought up that, because if WWE is a business, they are a money-making machine, and that at the end of the day, that's what they care about doing, is making money. And I'm not knocking them on that, because if I was running a business, I want to make money off of it. So if they couldn't see that there was money within the ladies at that time, they would not have, pushed it, no matter how hard really anyone clamored for it. As long as there's money in it, the WWE will push it. In my opinion, at least, they have to make money.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if you think about it, I mean, let's not forget. I think it was a SmackDown. It's always
Love
SmackDown.
the blue brand.
I'm a blue brand guy. 2 hours works better in my schedule. But I believe it was right before Christmas, and they did like a 5-on-5 Total Divas Christmas edition elimination match or something along those lines.
Oh, I think I remember this.
Yeah, and they did like the fucking kick line. Yeah. Right in the middle of the thing.
I remember, yes.
All dressed in little Santa outfits.
It was literally like 7-on-7. It was like the cast of Total Divas versus the non-Total Divas. I remember this.
Right, that's exactly what it was. And then they did the kick line as people were coming into the ring, they were kicking them back out as they were doing the Rockette spot. And so to me, that's all well and good to an extent. Because of what WWE was at the time, right? A very short amount of time ago, but still, that's what they were. If you didn't have an AJ Lee, if you didn't have Emma, if you didn't have Paige and what they were doing, we might still be in that today, right? Like that's why it's a two-step process, because right now Total Divas was making money. They were able to exploit that on their weekly television programming, which, let's be honest, with 5 hours a week, you need to be able to get some filler, and that's a good spot to get filler because of the hype around that show.
Exactly.
And then if there wasn't somebody there to show, or the signings of Sasha and the signings of Charlotte and Becky Lynch down in there, and then what they were growing in NXT, if they didn't have that, well, then we may never have seen them fully transition, and it may be different now than it was then, and you could make the case that maybe it would have been a little better, but we wouldn't have gotten that full commitment, right? We would have still been in that, I'm both not pregnant and pregnant at the same time, and with that lack of commitment, who knows? Even Marie might still be here today. So it's one of those things where, sorry, Wilf, that you got to sit there and you got to look at that and you got to say, like, yes, cash drove this revolution from Total Divas. So for everybody that hates on Total Divas, know that, in my opinion, we wouldn't be where we are, right, as fast as we have without the idea, or without Total Divas being as successful as it was, and then compound that with the work rate of the wrestlers that were coming up through the system, perfect storm scenario.
Yeah, I agree. Total Divas changed. It made money. Therefore, like you said, it spiraled, of course, with some other things. And I think, just where women were in the world, had sports stars. Like, I think Ronda Rousey is someone that indirectly helped WWE. Whether people want to really think that, or, some people are not going to agree with that, and that's fine. But I do think people like Ronda Rousey, Serena Williams and stuff, showing that they could be... You look at Ronda in UFC, and I mean, I'm not a big, huge UFC fan. I know enough of it, and I know enough about this to kind of comment on it, but all I know is that Dana White was not, really keen on the idea of having women fight in the UFC until kind of Ronda came along, and listen, for someone that doesn't watch UFC, I knew who Ronda Rousey was, so she had to be doing something right. And I think it'd be weird for WWE or Vince or whoever the powers that be look at someone like Ronda Rousey and go, hey, well, she is their top draw in a sports-orientated world, and she's kind of the star of the UFC. Can we do that here? There has to be a little bit in someone's head that goes, yeah, okay, maybe that was a catalyst of what we are today.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, again, when UFC back then, I mean, it didn't get any hotter than Ronda Rousey. I mean, but again, I think that translates to the back end of the Divas era too, and Total Divas, and the impact that Total Divas had on all this was that you could look at Ronda Rousey, and as a young girl, she was a role model, right? And you can do and be anything because look what I've accomplished, right? I'm headlining a pay-per-view for UFC. They created a division and weight classes for women because of me. And they've shown investment behind multi-billion-dollar organizations because of the merits that I bring to the table. Well, if you look back and outside of just the wrestling fandoms, right? The fans of wrestling, the little girls who enjoy wrestling, right? You didn't really have the role model aspect so much. I will tell you that, in my opinion, Caitlyn and AJ were really the two to look up to, right? And I think they played their cards very well with that, and I think they did a fantastic job. So I don't want to take anything away from them when I say this. But for the mainstream audience, or for the casual audience, or for the women growing up and the girls growing up and being able to turn on E! Network and see successful athletes, right, sports entertainers, and then see behind the scenes at the lives that they live and the dramas that they have and be able to relate with them on a more personal level, I think that brought more fans in. So yes, cash flow for the business, that's great. Let's push it forward, right? But I think from a general interest within the women's wrestling in general, you look at Nikki Bella, at Brie Bella, and the differences between the two of them. I mean, geez, they're night and day. And then people like Natalya, who's been in the business forever, and Naomi. And even Eva Marie and the things that she was able to accomplish because she really was a model, right? Like she was learning how to wrestle. She was trying to pay her dues the best that she could, knowing that she was granted an opportunity that other people were killing themselves for on the independent scene that she didn't take for granted, mind you. It was one of those things that, as a young girl, like those are people that you can begin to look up to, which is then going to invest you into getting into wrestling. And then you double down on that by then bringing women wrestlers up like Charlotte, like Paige, like Sasha, Becky Lynch. Now you can begin to tap a resource that you otherwise haven't been able to tap because, well, they're models. I'm not a model. I'm not this. Whatever that is, right? And I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm not 100% myself because I would never assume that I know everything. But but to be able to create that personal bond through a reality television show and then translate that into making new fans that otherwise weren't fans, I think it was a tremendous success. And again, I just feel that was what's the word there? It was an effect. It was a
I
whatever
that
mean,
yeah,
you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Gee, I was lost there for a second, but yeah, it was a way of bridging the gap to these people to get them into wrestling. And so again, I think it should be something that we talk about.
Yeah. When you look at the year that Ronda Rousey had, a lot of people are like, she was this. She was kind of thrusted into the title picture, and whatever. Well, to me, she should be the champion. She is a star, and you want as many eyes on the product as you can. So I won't even get into that too much. But when you just look at from what you like as a fan and just purely from your view, what did you think about Ronda Rousey's year in WWE?
I thought it was above average. Okay. It was as above average as it could be. I mean, we know that WWE likes to bring in their stars, so I'm accustomed to that when I watch their product, right? I'm not going to criticize a formula that's worked for 40 years because my fandoms, as I've matured as a person, have dived more into maybe Japanese wrestling or independent, you know what I mean? Like I can separate the two. I can look at them objectively. But when she came, the thing that people forget, and this is the part that drives me crazy, is that we have this recency bias. And it's not a bad thing. It's just one of those things where it's like, you go back and you watch TLC when she signed that contract when she first came in. right? And the crowd and how hot they were for Ronda, right? And how excited they were to get her in, and then the spot that she ended up doing with Triple H through the table.
Yeah.
Like, and everything they built from there, was incredible. And where the criticisms came soon thereafter, because, again, Super Green never did it before, right? Yeah. Thrown right into the limelight, won the title. Who's going to beat Ronda? And nobody should have beaten Ronda, right? Through that time frame. So they did all that right. But then the storybooking element with the Authority, and then getting Stephanie McMahon involved, and the lethargic nature of WWE with their storybooking every once in a while, came to a head to where they needed to pivot a couple times, up to and including, pretty much her shooting on the crowd and shooting on everybody by saying it's all fake, to try to garner some interest as Becky was kind of building her run. Yeah. But all of that aside, right? So again, it ended a little on the sour side from fans, and people were welcome that she left. And people tend to remember the end, not the beginning. When I look at it, I sit there and I say, you are a global superstar. Everybody knows who you are. You've never done this before. And they threw you in and made you the face of this division in the biggest company in the world. And they gave you the title, and you were unstoppable for a year. That type of pressure, no matter who you are, right, now that we can kind of remove ourselves 6 months later, that type of pressure to put on somebody, people will crack under that type of pressure.
Oh, of course.
She cracked a little, but overall, the egg didn't break. So in that instance, I think that, was she stellar? No, of course not. Her promos were terrible. Her in-ring work wasn't the best from time to time. Her wrestling fashion was garbage, which I've spoken a lot about with Queen. And it's just one of those things where it didn't hit on every level. But, man, for coming in as green as you are and rocking the year, yeah, I don't know if it could get any better for somebody of that type of notoriety outside the wrestling business.
Yeah, she brought in a lot of eyes, and I'm kind of glad that I can have this conversation with you, and you understand, like, I get why she's here. A lot of people are like, she sucks, she's this. I don't think Ronda sucked at all. I don't think Ronda sucked. For someone who had very little experience in a wrestling ring, she adapted pretty damn well, and she brought in enough eyes to kind of justify her, I guess, lack of it. Well, she was green, but of course you're going to be green when you've been wrestling as long as she has. So,
right.
But I think she did have a pretty damn good year. Whether she'll be back or not is a question that I certainly can't answer. But I mean, I certainly would like to see her back just for a little bit longer, just to kind of end out her time, because as you said, a lot of people, I know I did for a little while, was a bit like, okay, you can go now, just because of the story. I wasn't, like, the story of going into Mania with her and Becky and Charlotte was what it was. It was, to me, it was a very simple story that should have been told very simply, but they went in many different routes with that story, and there was a lot of twists and turns, but it is what it is. We still got to the main event of WrestleMania, and they still delivered a pretty good match, I think. But yeah, Ronda's time was Ronda's time, and hey, I guess it was now or never for her. So in that sense, I'm glad that she was there, and I'm glad that we can kind of look back and go, hey, we were a part of that, we watched that, and we seen her kind of very chaotic year. She had a very busy year in the WWE, but I think it was fun to watch. I do. We've talked a lot about like that kind of era and where it's kind of led to now. What do you think, the women now in WWE have done, is the pinnacle of it main eventing WrestleMania? I mean, you can't really get much bigger than that in WWE's mind. What's some things you would like to see from the future of women like in that role in WWE? Because I guess no matter how much, it's hard to justify some other places, but WWE indirectly affects a lot of the wrestling business, just in terms of, they indirectly affect it in terms of, like, if the business is hot and stuff like that, there's a lot more eyes on WWE than there is anywhere else. And that's not a knock on anywhere else. It's just, it's a lot more casual people watching WWE programming. But regardless of that, what would you like to see from the future of WWE's way of using the women? Because, like I said, main eventing WrestleMania is, hey, it's pretty damn big.
Yeah, no, it's huge, and I'm glad, and I'm happy for them, and I'm glad that they committed to it. I'm glad they saw the value in it. And I'm glad that they did it. I think the next steps, again, there's a couple different paths you can go down here. The two biggest that stand out for me, number one is I would like to see more consistency with the amount of time that the women's roster gets on the live television, right? Not just because, of an equality thing, right? Which is important and it should be talked about. But more importantly, like, they have so many women wrestlers, both on Raw and SmackDown, that, if it's 60-40 men to female, then that's not being represented on the screen, which means that some people are not doing anything. And that sucks as a fan, right? Like, not because they 60-40, so it should be 60-40 on screen. No. Because fairness. Life's not fair, right? So other storylines are hot and you're putting on a show and you're doing all these things. But, the fact that we didn't get Ember Moon, the fact that Asuka goes on ice 3 times a year, because they just don't commit to fleshing out storylines. Like, you don't need a title match to have a women's storyline that doesn't involve a man.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
There's a whole creative element to that they just haven't touched on yet. Like, bring in women writers to write for women to show that it's not a one angle where it's Naomi and her boyfriend or her husband and Mandy Rose coming in and trying to steal her husband away. You know what I mean? Like, you can do these things, and they did it with Natalya and they did it with Ruby Riott.
Yes.
And you can feel any way you want to feel about the decal being on, Jim Neidhart being on the table, but at least they committed to doing something different.
100% agree. Oh my God.
Yeah. So like, in that instance, I'd really like to see them go that direction. At the same time, they are signing a lot of women talent right now. And where I don't want to see NXT talent move to a separate program on WWE's network, I would like to see a developmental show that really celebrates some of these signings that you don't even get to see on the NXT level, like Conti and Chelsea Green, and all these. Mia Yim's doing pretty decent on NXT right now.
I think she's fantastic.
Yes. And it's like almost like I liken it to like Rise, right? How Rise is kind of that feeder system for Shimmer and Shine, and then the American Independents in general. Like, man, you sign so much talent that you can just put all these people on, and you could do like a monthly or a monthly show where it's just like, what you could have used for what was the last pay-per-view? Ground something. Stomping Ground.
Yeah.
You could do like a Stomping Ground, but it's all developmental women. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks where they put on a show and you just kind of get to see them evolve over time. Like, I think that would be something that people would be interested in, and it would show an investment in some of the signings that they made early. Things like that. Like, I would like to see that more.
For me, I think I know this will probably never happen just in the society we live in, not just in wrestling, but I wish there was less women's wrestling and more just wrestling, if you get what I mean. I wish it was just more normal that, it's not like, oh my God, women are main eventing a pay-per-view. It's just like, no, it's just a wrestling match main eventing a pay-per-view. I wish it was more of that, just the norm. Like, you see Becky and Lacey at Extreme Rules, and they were involved in the mixed tag match, and it was a main event, and you didn't really see too many people going on about the fact that it was, oh my God, women are in a main event. It's just like, no, they're in a main event because that's the story that deserves to be in the main event. I would just more like to see that with the wrestling everywhere, just kind of going, whatever deserves to be in the main event should be in the main event. Whether it's men, whether it's women, it doesn't matter. I just wish it was more of that kind of sense of just, this is just normal, and we're just going with whatever we're invested in the most. That's what deserves to be pushed accordingly. But I don't know if we'll ever get to that kind of stage, but who knows? I love the fact that you kind of brought up talent that isn't really being, a lot of signings that aren't featured on NXT TV and whatever, whoever that may be, but there is a lot of talent, men and women, that are very much killing it as of late in terms of, it's just, I just wish it was more of a norm, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I think, I'd like to sit here and be optimistic. WWE has done a lot in a short amount of time with regards to their commitment to that division. they have problems, in my opinion. And again, it's strictly based off circumstance. Again, when you got to do 5 hours of live television a week, it's not easy. And I think we lose that as fans from time to time. Like, to go write 5 hours of wrestling every week and for it to make sense, it's not easy, especially when you're following a formula. And let's be honest, you don't have creative control over it at all. You just come up with the ideas, they tell you to flesh it out, and then it gets either pushed or greenlit or struck down by Vince. There's going to have to be a fundamental change in the way they look at their bookings to even put on, like, even on the men's side, like how many storylines are we really invested in? Not a tremendous amount. At least there's criticisms each week on some of the storylines that they're doing. So you're kind of protecting the women's division a little bit when you know that that's the type of consistency that you're getting. At least that's my justification. But over time, it would really be nice to see, instead of, like, for example, Bayley versus Ember at SummerSlam, which I'm all for, right? And I'm excited for it. And I'm glad that they're doing that. Like, man, there was no story there. You know what I mean? Like, they're just kind of like, oh, okay, this is the next one. She earns it. Boom. I want to go with Ember. And then the crowd pops. That's great.
Yeah.
But, man, like, to have a little bit of a story, and they can build it now, sure. But we already know what the match is. But, like, for Ember to be able to, go out there and kind of get on a winning streak and kind of get people behind her and to be people talking about how she should be the next person up. And then she goes into a number one contenders match against Lacey or whoever. It doesn't matter. Or Alexa, and she can get a win over Alexa or something. I think that just goes a long way to build interest and build momentum behind people. And not that Ember needs it, but she's the example, and you could just further her excitement for that match. They're just not doing that right now, and they just need to start doing that.
It's across the board. It's across the board. They're not doing it. It's just kind of, and again, like you, I'm all for Bayley and Ember, but it's across the board. They just go, yeah, okay, you're the next one. And it's like, okay, whatever it may be. Hey, I'm all for Ember and Bayley getting a chance at SummerSlam to, hey, we've never seen this. This is going to be really, really fun.
It's going to be incredible.
Yeah, it will be. Kind of as we wind down, kind of one last question for you would be, Mae Young Classic 3. Can we have another one this year?
Mae Young 3, you said?
Yeah. Can we have a third?
We can have a third. I think we can have a third. And there's a couple people that I think that kind of stand out in my mind. And it really depends on kind of what they do, right? I mean, obviously, Conti's going to be there. Zaya will come back over. You still have Rhea, who you can play with in that role. But there are some people in the independents worth looking at. Some won't get far in the tournament. And I think Dakota Kai is back some point this year. But they definitely they definitely should do it because for two reasons. One, there's as much as people like to look at WWE as being this evil empire, which again you could make the case, right?
Yes. Yeah, you could definitely make the case, but
totally make the case.
Zone here. I'm proudly a WWE fan.
Me too. I am too. I'm on holiday right now, and again, I'll tell you, it's doing tremendous. Like, I really enjoyed Extreme Rules, and I didn't watch it, or I didn't watch the build into it, right? Because again, it was just go into it with fresh eyes type of feel. But it is one of those things where it's like, every once in a while they do some goodwill type of things for the industry. And I think the Mae Young Classic, I think, is a good it's good goodwill, right?
Yeah.
To have somebody like Tessa come in the first year, to have Zaya there last year, to bring in the likes of Rachel Ellerling, and have her perform. Obviously, you have your key signings, your Kairi Sanes and your Io Shirai's and Toni Storm, signing with NXT UK and coming in and doing what she did last year. Like, obviously, you have your heavy hitters who are going to be there towards the finals and the semifinals, but then to bring in someone like Mako, right, and have her make it to the semis, like, she's deserving. She could win the damn thing and be fine. But, like, just the fact that they brought her in, this legend from, and I know Tokyo Japan's a thing and they're talking, I get all that, but like for them to bring in the founder of Sendai Girls and allow her to perform multiple matches in a row, and then for people then to get eyes back on Sendai because of that, or for these women to come in and be able to build a little traction, get some name brand on the network, and then to go out there and be able to raise their pay, I think
stock. They're raising their stock. Someone like Mercedes Martinez going in, who, hey, let's be honest, I'm not, and this isn't a knock on Mercedes, but 6 years ago she would not have been looked at to come into the WWE at all. You know, Mako would not have been looked at all to come into the WWE because of the Mae Young Classic. And like you said, people can say what they want about WWE, and there's a point to be made that there's some evil kind of place and, you know, Dark Lord or whatever it may be. But there's not really too much more exposure than you'll get being on a WWE program, whether people want to admit that or not. And for people like Mercedes and Mako and whoever else you want to say.
Tessa. I mean, look at Tessa Blanchard 2 years ago.
And you could really, you know, say that maybe not got her to where she is now, but it certainly wouldn't have hurt her being on the WWE network. Even if it's just a first round loss, it really didn't matter at that point, especially being a part of the first Mae Young Classic, because there's really nothing like the first time. So, I mean, I hope we get a third this year. I really do. There's enough talent, and there's enough talent within NXT, if you just look at NXT, to kind of really have the key people that you need to have in these tournaments to make it a success, because there's so much talent within the world, men and women, that just don't have the exposure that WWE has. And hey, raise their stock and let's hope for the best. And I don't know if we'll get it again this year, but I'm certainly hopeful that we will.
Well, I think if they're not going to do Evolution, which it doesn't seem like it's in the cards, which is a shame, because it was one of their better pay-per-views last year. It really was. Which, again, kind of goes back to that commitment thing. Like, that really should be not even like a secondary monthly pay-per-view. Like, that should have its own month. You know, because, again, it was so successful. It was one of their – I'll tell you, it was one of the top 3 shows they had all last year.
It's been one of the best shows I've watched in recent memory.
Yeah, and a lot of hype around it. It didn't sell well. That's the problem, right? Like it didn't. Like, again, if it would have sold out, if it wasn't in Nassau, Long Island, and it would have sold out at another arena, we would probably still have it this year, because it always goes back to money, right? So they're looking at it from a financial decision, not what it does for the overall, you know, improvement of these women, or the women's push in WWE, but it is one of those things where it should be there. But yeah, I think we'll see Mae Young this year. I don't think we'll see Evolution.
No, unfortunately, I don't think we see Evolution either, for a multitude of reasons that, I mean, I'm not happy about. I loved Evolution. I've talked about Evolution many times on this show, and I just adore it and appreciate it. I've watched it many times, and I still love it like the first time I watched it. So that's when you know you've got a good show. But, man, I really didn't expect to do a whole show in this kind of time, but I am not mad at all. Not mad at all. Thank you for coming on today, because it really was a really cool conversation that I really haven't had.
Hey, man, anytime. You jumped right in my wheelhouse, which I appreciate. Talking women's wrestling. Which, again, you know, I'll do any time, but then to bring it to WWE, I do very rarely. So thank you for the invite and bringing me on and giving me a palatable topic.
No problem at all. And I love speaking with you. I've always said that you're one of the best brains that I've ever been able to talk with about wrestling, because you kind of are like a really big palette of information. It's cool to have. Before we go, I do have to say that I did mention this on Diving In this week, but if you haven't listened to Diving In, which, hey, subtle plug, go check out my Twitter and you'll find out where you can find Diving In. Just search Diving In with Josh anywhere on any podcast app and you'll find Diving In. But next week will be a very special episode of Wrestling Reverb, because on the 25th of July, the day before, on the Thursday of next week, is my 1 year anniversary, my first birthday in podcasting. So, we're going to have a little bit of a celebration, a little bit of a birthday party next week. So stay tuned next week here on Brainbusta Radio for a little bit of a fun, happy celebration of of Wrestling Reverb's first birthday. So I'm sure you will check out that JPQ, because I know you do listen. So that's very much appreciated. But yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of a fun episode next week. So I hope everyone stays tuned for that. But until next week, again, thank you, JPQ, for joining me, and Kevin will be back next week, no doubt. But hey, if I can't have Kevin here, I'm very happy that you are here.
Happy to be here, man. And hey, mazel tov to the 1 year.
Yes. I'll have a celebration drink as I record. I probably won't because I usually record at 8:30 in the morning. But hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, hey?
That's right.
But hey, until next week, we will see you next time right here on Brainbusta Radio for more Wrestling Reverb. Peace out.
Hey everyone, David Conrad here, owner of the Gorilla Position Wrestle Store. We're an online store headquartered in San Antonio, Texas, bringing you the best and original wrestling shirts, accessories, collectibles, and more. We're glad to be partnering with Brainbusta Radio, and to thank them and to thank you, we're offering 10% off all purchases with the coupon code BRAINBUSTA. That's BRAINBUSTA. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under @GPWrestleStore, or check out our website, www.gpwrestlestore.com. Remember, when you want the best wrestling experience, you gotta hang out in Gorilla Position.